What's up? It's Miles, and today I'm going to talk about some of the greatest challenges that I've faced so far as an English language and culture assistant in Spain. So before I start this video though, I do want to acknowledge that my job is actually really easy. I only work 12 hours per week, and my only real responsibilities as far as teaching goes are, kind of giving presentations and speaking to students and correcting pronunciations for the most part. So I don't want this video to be like a complaint video or like my job is so hard. I do just want to kind of share my experience so far as somebody who's new to being in the classroom. It's like halfway through my second year, and someone who's, kind of new to working with students of all different ages and English levels. So without further ado, here are the greatest challenges I've faced so far. Challenge number one. I call this the challenge of blank stares and unenthusiastic learners. So, like I said, one of my main duties as a English language assistant is just kind of speaking to students. So that could mean anything from having like conversation in small groups to giving presentations on things like American culture or politics. It's a hot topic now. Any kind of thing like that. So I'm doing a lot of speaking to students and also trying to get them to speak back, engage them in a way that helps them practice their English, but also helps them practice their listening skills as well. One thing that I've kind of struggled with is, I guess you could say, judging the reactions of students to my presentations, because I'm giving to presentations with so many different classes and so many different age ranges and levels of English. It can be kind of hard to tell when students either A, have no idea what you're saying, B, just don't care, or C, it's kind of a mix of both, where they don't really know what you're saying too much, but they're also not very interested. So, a common occurrence I'll have is I'll be given a presentation, and about 5 minutes in, I'll try and ask some questions to, get them engaged, at least kind of, I like to have more of a discussion than a presentation, because I think just kind of lecturing is boring anyway. But sometimes I'll try and kind of encourage that discussion, and there'll just be nothing. Like, they'll look at me like zombies, just like nobody's there. Then I have to ask a lot of times, like, do you guys understand what I'm saying? And they'll kind of be like, yeah. I'm like, okay. So it's a tough situation, and it varies by class, sometimes even within classes. I'll give the same presentation, like exactly the same kind of questions to two different classes and get completely different reactions. So that's an issue. It's definitely one I've struggled to deal with a little bit. The second part of that is the completely unenthusiastic learner, which is basically like what you have in any school. It's to be expected. There's students who just don't care. They'll talk while you're presenting, they'll interrupt, they'll just kind of laugh the whole time, or just check out completely. So those are kind of tough to deal with. I'm not at all a disciplinary person. I don't feel it's definitely not my job to tell kids that they need to be paying attention. I feel like that's more the teacher's job. So it's kind of a tough situation, because occasionally I'll have classes with quite a few of those students who just don't seem to care at all. I try and engage them as much as possible, at least to get them saying a few words in English, but it's hit or miss for sure. Challenge number two, adjusting for different age groups and English levels on the fly. So I only work 12 hours per week, but in those 12 hours, I'm actually working with about, I want to say 6 or 7 different professors each week. And it actually changes on a bi-weekly basis. So I have a very rotating schedule, which means a lot of different classes and a lot of different students. So some of my classes, I have 12-year-olds who are just starting English, and they're learning. You have to speak in very simple verb tenses, things like that. And then other classes, like right after, I'll go to a class of 16-year-olds whose English level is pretty high. They understand everything I'm saying, and conversation flows smoothly. It's great. And then on the other hand, I'll actually have classes where I'll have 12-year-olds or 13-year-olds who have a really high level of English for their age, and then go to a class of 17-year-olds who have just started learning English, and it's kind of a trip, because you tend to associate levels with age, but it's actually, you can't do that in this job, and it also depends on the school. So that's always kind of been a challenge for me. I guess it just kind of comes down to developing a rhythm and knowing your students pretty well. It's definitely takes some adjustment though to get used to adjusting to different verb tenses. You can't speak to certain classes the same way you can speak to others. So sometimes I can just use the present tense. Sometimes I can use all kinds of different tenses and speak like I normally would to a fellow native English speaker. So it just depends, but that's definitely been an adjustment that I'm still getting used to. Last but not least, challenge number 3, knowing how and when to correct students. I already talked about how giving presentations and encouraging speaking and listening with the students is one of my main duties, but pronunciation and helping students correct and fix their pronunciation is another big part of my job. And it's actually the part of my job that I would say makes me the most uncomfortable. A lot of the students, you can tell that they're very nervous to speak English. It's kind of a nerve-wracking experience to have to get up in front of the class and read something out loud when you're not sure how to pronounce. And English is not a phonetic language, so pronunciation is kind of crazy sometimes. And as someone who took a Spanish class, several Spanish classes, and hated speaking in front of the class, hated having to show off my horrible Spanish pronunciation, I can totally relate to my students, and I think that's part of the reason I struggle so much with correcting their pronunciations, because I really don't want to discourage them any further, especially those students who are super nervous. So I've been experimenting with different ways to correct pronunciation in a constructive way. The problem I face most though is just in an hour-long class with 30 students, there's not a lot of time to pull students aside and help them individually with their pronunciation. So the way that a lot of my professors already do things is just the student will be speaking, and as soon as they make a mistake, they'll correct the pronunciation. I found that it tends to interrupt the flow of a lot of students, especially if they're already kind of nervous about speaking English. So I try to avoid doing that when possible. One thing I'm experimenting with is kind of taking notes during class and of the general mistakes that students will make. So there's definitely certain errors that almost all Spanish students will make in English pronunciation, and I'll go over those mistakes as a class so as not to single anybody out. I can't do that all the time, so really just trying to be as gentle and nice as possible. And also there's sometimes when a student is they make so many errors in a sentence that I'll pick like the ones that I feel are the most important, but also the easiest to correct, and that could apply to everybody in the class. So it's a work in progress for sure. I've talked to a lot of different professors, and they all kind of have different styles of how they like to correct students. So I'm always learning. I'm just trying to get a feel for what works best for me and my personality and my leadership style. But hopefully, my goal with it is just to encourage students to speak as much as possible, because I realize that even native English speakers don't speak perfect English, so I don't expect them to either. I know it's important that they learn proper pronunciation, but I think the fact that they're speaking and that they have the confidence to keep speaking is what's most important. So I really want to develop that in my students, but also help them with their pronunciation as well. So those were the 3 biggest challenges that I've faced so far as an English language assistant. I'm sure there might be challenges that a lot of teachers face. So I hope if you're interested in this kind of job, or you're doing something similar already, you can gain some value from this and from my own experiences. And also if you know how to handle some of these situations in a better way, I'd love to hear about it. I'm always trying to grow as a teacher and a leader. So anyway, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.